Welcome to this year's SNOMED CT Research Symposium, Unlocking Research Potential with Large Language Models. I'm Susie Roy, Collaborations and Research Engagement Specialist from SNOMED International, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Rory Davidson, Chief Digital Technology Officer, and we're your hosts for today's Research Symposium. Every year we host a special event during our SNOMED CT Expo, where we put a special spotlight on some aspect of our research community. As we were engaging with our community this year, we started to notice a trend, and we noticed that a lot of you are very interested in large language models, or LLMs. So for some of you, this is a very exciting new field of research, and then for some of you in here, that might just be a really cool buzzword. So what we're hoping today is that we can kind of demystify a little bit of this, because there are many definitions, but essentially in a very basic sense, LLM is an AI, or an artificial intelligence class of deep learning models that are used to process and interpret large amounts of data utilizing neural networks. And LLMs help to enable computers to understand and generate text similar to how we humans communicate. And that's actually really what makes this whole venture really, really exciting. And as this tech becomes more widely used and data sets become more available, we'll start to see an increased use in computing capabilities, and we'll eventually see a decrease in computing costs. But of course, how and where does SNOMED CT fit into this? And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to begin to tackle some of this, and we're going to do this by showcasing some current research in our SNOMED CT community. So today's symposium, we're going to start with Dr. Anthony Scheck, and then we're going to move into a couple of research presentations. In the middle of those research presentations, we will have a catered break, and then we'll come back and we'll complete our third of our research presentations. And then we'll have a short little Q&A panel with our researchers. So as we go through, we'll be able to have a nice conversation amongst the audience as well as our panelists. And then we'll have a short little video, and then we'll end with a update on the SNOMED International Innovations strategy from our Chief Digital Technology Officer. So to kind of kick things off today, we have a very special presentation from our esteemed colleague, Dr. Anthony Scheck. Anthony is no stranger to our SNOMED CT community. He is the lead NLP engineer at Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital in London, where he spearheads the development and implementation of AI-based NLP technologies. He advises on the deployment of large language models in multiple hospitals across the UK and also internationally. And I know that we're going to learn a lot about LLMs and the integration of SNOMED CT with those. So Anthony?
Ooh. No, brilliant. Can everyone hear me all right? Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me, and especially it's been really nice to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces here in Seoul. And so, looking forward to meeting you all and discussing, I guess, what we're all interested in here today, and it's how SNOMED and this hype of large language models integrate together. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about the, we're at SNOMED CT, a terminologist group. How does large language models fit into this sort of environment in healthcare? And so I'm just going to briefly talk and introduce the session by talking about the hype and the AI revolution. What are large language models? What is the modern day foundation of healthcare, and where is all that data and information stored? And that's in this electronic health record, the importance of this infrastructure that needs to be built before we can develop AI models in healthcare. How SNOMED fits in with LLMs, of course, and success factors for research and research in the AI space, and how we can use these models for healthcare. And so first of all, just to set up the ground, looking at these AI models and the advancements, and there's been so much hype since, especially since ChatGPT was released, this by a company called OpenAI. And what they've done is made it accessible to the masses, and everyone has had a bit of a taste of what these models can do. What they did is nothing. I mean, it is innovative in a way. It's been really, really usable, and what it's done is captured the imagination of the everyday person. But since then, since that release, there's been a whole plethora or a Cambrian explosion of models, or these large language models as well. And so what's been special is this whole idea of being generative. And that is a type of artificial model that can resemble and produce new data, images, and text based on the patterns of the data set that it was trained on. And so they dazzle us a little bit with our generation and has inspired us to dream of its capabilities and potentials. And we can, I guess this is why this session's so busy, because we've all seen the potentials for our own problems and use cases. Whether it is, can I automate my email to my colleague? Can I respond better to my partner? Or can I write a better love letter? Or can I automate mappings of SNOMED CT? So a bit of everything. And so what these large language models are really good at is, and where we can relate to, is that they can do some human tasks intelligently. They can summarize, simplify, organize, analyze, and compare. And that's something very similar to what I do on a day-to-day basis, or what we do on a day-to-day basis as a researcher, as a scientist, or as a doctor. And so large language models are called large because they're trained on a huge amount of data. And they have this capacity to store patterns in this form of the parameters of a model. And so, looking at this large language models, or they training on lots of the data, they iterate through all the data patterns and all the corpus of the data set, and they identify patterns in the data. So to understand the word seizure in this case, by going through the big data set, it can see many, many examples. And so that's how it understands and boosts its knowledge, and it captures that within its 5 parameters. And so large language models, just another perspective of looking at it, it can be considered as an indirect form of compression. And so not a lossless form of compression where you can take a file and you can zip it, and then if you unzip it, you get exactly the same copy. It's a type of lossless compression, where in the case of these large language models, they take a big chunk of the internet or a data set, you add a bit of compute to it, and you can store that, or almost consider it as pieces of a jigsaw, which you can then use to piece together. And the patterns of and instructions how to piece it together, or probabilities, is stored in these parameters. And so there is, I guess, a part that is generative, right? And so what does it mean? And so there's this thing called autoregression, where each generative new word or token is then used to help the prediction or forecasting of the next one. So over time, with each one, it can continue indefinitely or until a stop word or token is encountered. So, but it doesn't stop there, right? Nowadays, the way how we encode text, we can also encode other forms of data as well. And so this year has been really the year of multimodal artificial intelligence, where it's not just text, but it's other modalities as well, from images, genomic sequencing, histopathology reports as well. And so here's just a quick or schematic of how you can also chain together these different components, where you are entering what we call, I guess, complex or unstructured data sets. We're encoding it and making it machine understandable. And then you can query that kind of data set using large language models as well. And you can get an output in any form that you want. We're used to a very verbose outputs like ChatGPT, where you ask it a question and it gives you a narrative or an answer. But you can also ask it to and format it in a way that there is clear and defined structure. If you wanted to output in a certain format to make it interoperable, if you want to output in a FHIR format and make it strict, these capabilities are now very possible, and we're not relying on text-derived formulations. You don't have to learn the pattern of FHIR. You just tell it and fill in the gaps. You can also fill in structured formats. You're not asking it anymore to generate SNOMED codes, although you can do to potentially explore new SNOMED codes, but you're asking it to potentially look it up in the SNOMED dictionary or the terminology server. But there is a big hype around these models, and it's not new, right? And there's a common theme to all of this. So, being in the space quite a bit of time, there's often a pattern, and this is an example called the Gartner hype cycle, taken from the consulting field, how an innovation is often followed with a huge amount of expectation and hype. Then there is this trough of disillusionment, where, actually, maybe it can't solve everything that I set out to do. But in reality it probably is somewhere in the middle. For where our dreams are to where reality is, we slope up to this idea of where we can productively use these models, but it takes time to get there. And so this hype cycle starts from, it hasn't started, but it's been a continuous cycle, from big data to machine learning to deep learning to computer vision, back to sort of NLP or these large language models, transformers, agentic workflows, RAG pipelines, and multimodal AI. So the question is, I guess, what's next? And so, by no means is that in a linear order, but could, and I probably can have a bit of a discussion afterwards, but is it something like clinical reasoning? Is it meta learning or learning how to learn as well? So those are all sort of new ideas coming out, or even recycled. But ultimately, what are they all trying to do? And so these are all steps or progress towards a single direction, and that is to build more intelligent artificial systems. And that can, one, perceive and understand the world via data, vision, language, so whichever modality the data presents itself, and is to learn patterns from that data. Can it process it and make informed decisions? And can it react with the user, the end user, whether it being a human or another model or another output? Can it integrate seamlessly with the environment? And so probably the first two are, have a lot of progression here, but maybe the reasoning is yet to come. Although by no means it gives us the illusion that these AI models have this illusion that it can think or it's smart, but right now it's just patterns of the data. There is no absolute intelligence yet. And so going back a second, why, what's healthcare? And so not what's healthcare, but what are the sort of pressures that we face, and why are we turning to AI as a potential solution? And that's because there's lots of problems. In the real world, there is a huge demand on the healthcare sector. And that is because there's an aging population, ever-growing demand. There's advancements in the field of medicine where there's more patterns, where there's more new treatments and medications that are available, and it relies on X number of data. But there's a low supply of medical resources, capital, infrastructure, computational, and obviously staff as well to be able to process this. It's often government-funded organizations, and it can be quite a struggle to make it sustainable and to give absolutely everything to healthcare, because there's obviously an opportunity cost as well. And so sometimes the answer lies in the routinely collected data in the hospital. Hospitals collect data of every single patient and individual that visits them. And this is fundamentally a big data problem where there's so many patients and so many data points being generated. There's so many patients being volume. There's a whole variety of different data modalities, from tests to images to reports, and the truth, the veracity of the data and the missingness. And so I like to think that the foundation of the healthcare record, of healthcare, is this healthcare record. And so I like to use this analogy, definitely taken from my supervisor, that the EHR can be seen as a knowledge library. And that's a way of storing and cataloging information. And so clinical informatics is about building a structure, and not just a physical one, It is a structure of knowledge. And this electronic health record has a shelving system, and it's called a data model. And many EHRs, or patient record providers, have proprietary data models designed only for their software. And so this is the great library of patients. And so within this library is a lending library. And then that's where the books of individuals are borrowed and written into. And they're filed back into the shelves all by a non-librarian, so i.e. healthcare professionals. But what happens if there are no librarians? So this is what a library looks like without librarians. And so how do we do it before? We created these indexes, right? And so the current EHR systems use an indexing system that's often confined to identifiers, dates, and other structured data. But the things that clinicians and researchers are interested in are often not part of this index, or not even recorded or coded or formatted. So I guess they can either be coded or formatted in terms of SNOMED or ICD-10 and be entered into the index to allow you to search through it. So when I say that what the clinicians and researchers are interested in, it often relies in the free or unstructured text into the clinical narratives. Right? And it's hard to search through that if you go to a library to search for each and every word that the books contain in that library. But as I said, this was a lending library, and doctors often write into the pages of a book when they borrow it. A new patient comes in, they take out the book and they enter a new record. And so in this case, if they write, the patient has asthma and takes salbutamol, the doctor would need to also record into the index card coded information, whether it be SNOMED with particular codes, and only then can they search the record, search this library for patients that have asthma or salbutamol. But if they don't do it, then it's not going to be very easy to do it, to search the library. And so when you can code this data, and if you can surface it all, so rather than this surface level index, ultimately this improves our abilities to search the library. And this search is enormously powerful. And so this enables you to have a number of downstream use cases when you've cataloged and efficiently characterized each and every patient, disorder, medication. And so it allows you to do things like audits, quality improvement, decision supports, patient safety and continuity of care, population health management, and research use cases that you'll hear more about today. And how do you share or combine this library with other libraries around nationally or internationally as well? So we talk about standards, interoperability. And this allows us to efficiently exchange information amongst departments, amongst hospitals, amongst countries. And so we talk about, well, maybe AI is a solution, as does everyone. But in order to do AI efficiently, you need to invest into the infrastructure. And there's a hierarchy of AI needs. And so ultimately, the base of it is this digital infrastructure that you really need to invest in as an organization. And so this is often considered as workflows or data practice or a structure where you can enter and store data efficiently. Whether it's decentralized or centralized, it needs to be organized. And so that's when data can come in and sit very efficiently. And only on top of that can you put AI on top of it at the very peak and principle. And so when you've laid down the foundations or laid the plumbing to the city, then you can build up and build efficiently upon it. And then you can build your data factory or AI factory where you're producing new models, increasing productivity, reducing inefficiencies, and potentially increasing the economic or monetary value as well. AI models are changing weekly. And so, but this infrastructure to be able to support and supply the data to feed it, the foundations of what these AI models need is absolutely crucial, and it'll be the same for all models. So let me just give you an example. You can do AI, so what? right? You're going to hear many other examples today and throughout the next coming days as part of the SNOMED CT conference. But if you can catalog and structure the unstructured, and if it allows you to search through, you can characterize and extract and form timelines. So in this case, we have a timeline of an individual who has, this is a longitudinal timeline where each document represents a visit, or even several documents per visit, and it can be cataloged across time for each visit, for each patient. And over time, you end up building a health story in this book. And so similarly to how generative large language models can use historic data to generate new predictions and forecast it forward, you can do the same thing with risk as well for each patient. Can you learn from each and every book in this library, every single patient that's ever visited the hospital, to look for patterns? The reason why this works so well is because we know that there's patterns to medicine, right? Doctors call it experience. If you have diabetes, you often take diabetic medication. If you have epilepsy, you often have anti-epilepsy medication. And there's a whole series of side effects and symptoms that we routinely catalog anyway. But I guess a key question is you know, there's so much research going on, right? And why doesn't AI research always translate to the bedside or the patient? And if anything, there's papers being released daily, but less than 10% of these AI tools are actually adopted clinically. And this is because there's often quite a challenging environment to work in for these AI models. And it's something that we're just not used to. We don't have the process or governance to manage these at the moment. Often these AI models are dynamic, meaning that they're constantly trained, adapted, fine-tuned. And we don't really have a policy model to deal with this. So in the same way like we do for other static interventions, like for medications or devices where we have clinical trials, where once it goes through this clinical trial, you can pass it through for safety. But imagine if this drug changed every week, that was altered slightly. Would it need to go through this multi-million-pound clinical trial again? And so that's when you need to address, is there infrastructure as well to support these tools? Fine, you may have, you need to train this model and it can work really well. You need to train it every 2 weeks. But what happens if the training costs millions of pounds to do? Is the model safe? Is each training cycle safe? Is there necessary regulations? Is patient safety, privacy? Is that all being catered for? And is there value for money on this AI LLM applications? We often see it as researchers as looking at the output and evaluating that, but the cost for the development, maintenance as well, all need to be taken into consideration. And so what are the risks of this AI development or these AI models in healthcare? How accurate is accurate enough? And it very much depends on your use case. If you're doing something like clinical coding, it can be 70 or 80% accurate, right? As long as it's better than what's currently done. But what happens if it's a decision support where you're relying on, in COVID, who gets a ventilator and who doesn't? Sometimes 99% isn't enough. And so I'm going to leave you with some food for thought at the end of this presentation and just some tips that I've gathered through working with a variety of teams. And that's to, I guess, first of all, develop a deep understanding of this problem that you're trying to solve or resolve. However well-defined it is, and often it means going into the clinical setting and seeing tangibly why is it done the way it is. I would also focus on integrating clinically. If you're a researcher in a university, how do the clinical workflows look like as well? I think an analogy I like to use with developing a lot of these new products is, I don't know whether this is true or not, but Henry Ford said, if I would have asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Right? And so sometimes the users in the hospital, clinicians, they do not know what is possible. And so communication, collaboration, multidisciplinary research is vital. Another key factor to the success of deployment of these tools is this alignment of incentives, right? If you have AI models that need training data, is there a way you can gather that routinely? Rather than taking this limited resources of doctors out from their duties to train your models, can you integrate them? Rather than having them to do audits, because that's something that all doctors do. Maybe you can have them to train AI models. It's not too different after all. And so by aligning incentives, you can ensure the success for the maintenance or the usefulness of these products. In a healthcare solution or a government healthcare factor, what about if you add, if you add the value for these patients? And so what I mean by that is, if you have, can you have a healthcare system where you align the provider or provision of care with the benefit of the patient? So can a healthy patient be a cheap patient? Well, it would be in the case for some government structured models. So maybe if you intervene now earlier, the long-term cost can be saved for this patient as well. So it's a win for the government or the healthcare provider, and it's a win for the patient because they are ultimately getting better care. And I guess lastly, with a lot of these AI models, even if you're not training or changing it, or if you're not training it and changing it or altering it, there's often an ongoing human validation or iterative approach to it. And that's required for real world adaptability. Because healthcare is not a static thing. We're often growing, we're learning every day. Even SNOMED CT, right? We're adapting, adding new terms, but medicine and language changes. There's data drift and model drift as well. If you apply it to a new, different data set, even if they are English speaking, how well does it apply or translate there? And so on that note, thank you very much for listening. I hope there's something you can gain from it. And thank you once again for inviting me to open this session for large language models for research. And I'm sure there'll be lots of use cases of how we use AI to improve healthcare and SNOMED CT later today. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Thanks very much, Anthony. Another really interesting opening to one of our research symposiums. So we have some time for some Q&A. I open it to the floor. Please raise a question. Please do speak into the mics that are in front of you, because we do have people online. So yes, questions. Stefan.
I'm Stefan Schulz from Medical University of Graz in Austria. Thanks for your nice overview. Well, your main question was how clinical practice, clinical workflows can benefit from large language models. But I think, and of course, this is a very important and fundamental question, but I think for SNOMED International, there's another question, which is how can terminology developers benefit from large language models? What do you think?
Yeah. I think, thank you very much for that question, Stefan. And that is, they can enormously benefit from large language models or AI or various other aspects of AI as well. That's through either correcting the relationships or hierarchies, to writing new descriptions, to understanding which terms are similar or too similar to each other. So there's multiple different approaches and benefits. You have different ways of potentially automating the structuring or facilitating this human in the loop process of validating SNOMED concepts. I can't give you a single answer of where it does, because there's lots of avenues where it could potentially be applied. Looking forward to seeing where it gets applied. Thank you.
Is it? Okay. Thank you, Anthony. So one of the big things that we're doing right now in SNOMED CT is progressing, do we continue to add in a lot more content into the terminology, or do we focus a little bit more on the quality of that terminology? And from what you were just saying, it's kind of both. But I want to know from your perspective with regards to advancing from an AI perspective overall for healthcare data, do you recommend to SNOMED International that we focus more on more terminology content or on that QI?
I think it's definitely the quality is what I would recommend, and that is ultimately the value of SNOMED CT, and that is the human curation and validation through experts in each of the different areas. So you'll have a lot of AI applications that can generate new content relatively easily, but it is the sort of quality or stamp of approval that is what is needed and what SNOMED should certainly focus on. I'll answer that.
Regarding quality, what would you say would be most important? Adding descriptions in that sense of using SNOMED, or more like the ontological properties of relationships? Which direction should we choose?
So sorry, in that aspect, definitely both, right?
Yeah, but
all of it. So no, certainly.
How important is it to add descriptions? I mean, descriptions can be a lot of things.
Yeah. So I guess the key benefit of SNOMED CT is to have a unique description for each code, right? And you have synonyms afterwards, but that unique that unique representation of knowledge needs to be unique and defined. Often they can be quite similar, and challengingly, it can be quite sparse, where you need to potentially add more codes. Relationships, as you said, the other aspect of where SNOMED CT can improve in quality, mappings, the hierarchical relationships, extremely important, and you can certainly, there's lots of room for improvements there as well. So did I answer your question?
So recently, some Apple researchers have published a paper on the flaws or limitations of logical reasoning with LLMs. Can you comment on that in the context of SNOMED, which is based in a form of logic?
Yeah. Okay, so LLMs, I guess, reason in a very different way to how SNOMED CT is structured. I guess one benefit of SNOMED CT, of this quality, is that there is a human element that's, or how it has curated and classified medical knowledge and potentially lifestyle choices or genomics and things like that. I'm not familiar with this Apple paper of logic and reasoning, but that is very much a key area of interest for this large language model community, because I know, so right now, there's right now very much an illusion of this reasoning aspect from large language models, but as I said, they've just learned from patterns of the data. There is no inherent reasoning. It just gives you the illusion that there is some form of intelligence. However, that's not going to be the case going forward. And so whether that Apple paper is talking about previous LLMs or going forward will be another aspect. But I'm sure it won't be perfect or human-like, but it's improving weekly.
Yeah, I believe what they were doing was taking standard or the existing benchmarking tests and adding in additional statements that were oblique or confusing or irrelevant, but because the words were then added into the context, it confused the prediction algorithm. I won't say reasoning, the prediction.
Yeah.
And I guess the potential flow over here is if that sort of additional information appears in a patient's question to an LLM or less than competent or non-medical person providing some form of treatment, then that could do the similar kinds of...
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess probably taking a step back, why are we trying to build in these reasoning systems into these large language models? Because as I said, they're very much pattern recognition. That sometimes aligns with reasoning or how we think, but often quite not. You often hear about concepts or terms like hallucination or confabulation with AI models, and everyone thinks it's a flaw it's a flaw of these AI models. And in some ways, yes, it depends on your use case, right? But these have been designed to have that, and it is a feature of these AI models. You see it as a flaw when you have a binary answer or a strict answer where there's a right and a wrong. But these large language models are there to generate and learn from patterns of text, where if I said hello and welcome and finish off this speech that I'm going to talk about, there is no right or wrong way to do that. And when you have this variability, or you edit this temperature or probability factor, you increase the net narrativity or creativity in the textual results. And so often what people try to do is to get that yes or no binary classification, you do fine tuning. You take a model that has this high creativity and you set a new model with lower ones and you train it or fine tune it in a certain aspect. And so, but now I guess we're coming to this new age of why we're trying to get reasoning built into these models. And the reason for, I guess, there's huge benefits to if you can have a model that can think independently and can actually give you answers that you expect. Is this, what should the treatment plan be for this patient? Can you reason according to these national guidelines as well and follow them in a secure manner? And if you give a treatment plan, can you provide me evidence and why? So maybe it's not a fully autonomous system, but what it can do is for a doctor present them with, okay, this patient suffers from X, Y, Z. I recommended these guidelines for a first seizure, for example. Here's a reference to that guideline if you would like to click. So it's more of a being able to surface information rapidly rather than fully automating. So that's maybe another way of doing things.
Just building off Michael's question a little bit on reasoning, I do feel like there are aspects of reasoning that require large language models are trained on a lot of stuff, but just simple example, if you're doing medical coding to ICD and you have other and unspecified and specified things, the LLM might make a prediction about something, but really to understand whether it's other, you need to have the database of what all of the other things are, and it may not have been trained on that. And so you can potentially address that by jamming gigantic amounts of context into your prompt and so on. So I'm just curious what you think about where this is going in terms of sort of reasoning requires fundamental computation at some point too. And like, how does the LLM get out of its own model in order to access a potentially unlimited set of necessary data? I'll give one quick other example, which is I've tried the 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game. How do you connect these two actors? And it's pretty good, but can it ever answer a question like, what is the longest chain between two people? Because in order to answer that, it would have to know things that it almost certainly doesn't.
Yeah, fantastic. So you're right? These large language models, once they're trained, they're not really adapting to new environments, right? That's why you need to continuously train, but that can be expensive. But I guess, using, I guess not your second example because I'm not too familiar with it, but clinical coding is something I'm very familiar with, where there are, there's, a reference book or there's a book or a guidelines, but sometimes there isn't guidelines for everything. But for where there are guidelines or instructions, you can ask LLMs to reference that and draw conclusions from that. So this is there's a process called retrieval augmented generation, where it can look up information without having to train the model. And sometimes that's a better way of doing it because I'm not going to spend £2 million to retrain a model or fine tune. Maybe it's better if I use this approach and use it as almost a lookup system to say, don't use your inbuilt knowledge. You're essentially saying, I've got a large language model, it's learned English, right? But the medical domain, look it up because it may change tomorrow. It may change the day after tomorrow as well. There may be a new SNOMED release this quarter that's fundamentally different. And so rather than retraining a new model every time, follow the logic patterns that's been hard-coded, or first of all, refer to this documentation that has been humanly curated and fine-tuned. And you can also, rely on the large language model to apply reasoning, or you can code in some reasoning structures as well. So You have various approaches like chain of thought or tree of thought processes where you can do these sort of if-or statements. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but you can say, okay, which code does it best map to? If it's none of these ones, because there's asthma plus X disease, maybe it follows to this other category. Then if it goes to any other information that it's most similar to, and then, but even so, maybe you don't want a fully autonomous system because you can't trust it just yet. Maybe you have a human in the loop, a clinical coder to review that code. So that's how we would approach things. Hopefully, yeah. Thank you for that question.
Kim Wafeng from US National Library of Medicine. So my question is related to the data in the EMR. So even nowadays, I think the EMR is made up of more unstructured data rather than structured. So the conventional wisdom is that structured data like coded in SNOMED and other coding systems, they're more accurate of higher quality, so you can learn more, get better predictions from them. But with this uncanny ability of the large language models to understand free text or narrative text, is it still true that models trained on coded data or structured data is better or give better predictions? I mean, are there experiments comparing, just training from raw data, unstructured data to coded data? Right. Like things coded in SNOMED.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess just to repeat some of the key points from your question was that EHRs, if we could structure and code all that data, because that is definitely the direction that right now EHRs have been traveling in for the past few years. If it's all in the index, why don't we just use that? And ultimately, if it was true and all accurate, and doctors are all, have coded all that information, sure, that's not a bad solution. But I think ultimately there is a lot more to medicine than what current terminologies capture. And so it could be, and through free text, you can capture that narrative, right? All the nuances they don't just have seizures, they have severe seizures that occur during their breakfast time, right? And so sure, you can start coding each bit of information, breakfast, that could be valuable, severity, that could definitely be valuable as well. But often that's not quite done. And that's maybe because due to the limitations of the terminology itself, or it's due to the time pressures on these clinicians or coders to accurately capture that information. And so I know the past few years we've been striving towards a more structured data set, but I think in the next few years we're going to strive to more unstructured. Actually, we're going to go back through ambient recording in the listening room, where we start not having doctors to be entering directly information, but what you'll have is a recording device that ambiently listens to conversations in a safe and secure manner, and that you can use a categorical system to classify on a direct way to take that administrative burden away from these clinicians into the HR. Don't get me wrong, I still think structured data and terminology is extremely important to be the index of this library, but I don't think that clinicians will do it. I think they like their unstructured. There's a reason why unstructured is used and why we communicate continuously in unstructured. And we don't yet talk in emojis. Maybe we're going back to that. But that's how I would see things. There's often an interplay between getting a more structured or unstructured, but the reality is probably somewhere in the middle.
Anthony, thanks for your presentation. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Charles Guttridge and actually work in a hospital only a couple of miles away from Anthony's. My question is about bias. So I'm, as you probably know, a specialist in hematology. And in general, when a patient comes to my clinic, I try and make a hematological diagnosis. That's mostly because they're being referred to me through a filter process that says, my thought is this patient has a hematological problem and I want you to make the diagnosis. But inevitably, many patients came to my clinic that didn't have a hematological diagnosis. And yet the generalist pushed it my way, I push it another way. And my question really is, do you think the large language models, first of all, have a built-in bias, and how does one deal with that? And as a clinician, who do you trust more? Your own brain kind of thinking it through, knowing that you can make errors, or do you trust the large language model that gives you, in the end, the same output, which is a list of things that you should consider? And I don't have a feel for this. The reason for asking this question is that the enthusiasm with which my colleagues say, why don't we just do AI? And you must have that in spades at King's. With the sort of inbuilt thing that it's going to save enormous amounts of time and lots of, mean we can all go and play golf or whatever it is we're after. And I don't get it. I think LLMs are quite likely to make our jobs harder and take longer.
Fantastic. I think clearly we have someone in this trough of disillusionment here.
I never got to the high bit.
Hopefully. But I guess to reiterate or emphasize, is there bias in large language models? Absolutely, right? And so in the same way how large language models are so good at learning from patterns in the data, bias is a very much real pattern in the data, which they may or may not realize. And so this is, I guess, why we're starting to focus a little bit more on reasoning, because the impact that bias can have, especially in the healthcare sector, can be catastrophic, and especially for rare diseases or minority groups. So you don't want to be rolling out a tool that underserves minority groups as well, or incorrectly applied, and so they don't get to benefit from that. So that's why there's a whole push towards reasoning, not just in healthcare, and logical reasoning through looking at curated guidelines, understanding what they should be aware of. So in the same way how a human can be, or a clinician can be biased, thinking that, I've seen everything in medicine, no doctor has. But they develop their own intuition, and actually, medicine still, even to this day, I know we try and catalog it and put it into rules, but at the very top rare cases, it still is fundamentally an art. And so as long as they're aware of potential biases in this, by teaching them or having rules, or just to educate them to say, hey, this is maybe an edge case, you can do the same thing through reasoning of these AI models as well. So it's just to always include right now a very much human in the loop to validate and check if it's still working. And I guess right now there's a lot of process that you can mitigate it, right? Human in the loop, look at these guidelines, making sure you're continuously evaluating against different or ever-changing population as well. And I guess transparency is fundamentally on how these models have been processed. This education and awareness and limitations of the data set that your model's been trained on or exposed to. Often a lot of these large language models are trained in Western countries, and if you take them to an Eastern country, does it still hold the same truth? And likewise, the reverse way around, right? Everything from image recognition to narrative or lingo or expressions as well. So you find that the way how ChatGPT spells things is very American and not British. So it doesn't spell things correctly. But yeah, lots of bias, and there are ways to get around it. But I think ultimately it's educating the end user and the operators of these tools that is important, and awareness is key. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Always fascinating. So I look forward to seeing the unstructured version in a couple of years' time. I'm very excited to introduce Yuan Zhuang to come up and talk to us about how we're using these technologies to do some of the terminology work that we need to do to get SNOMED used. So welcome.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Okay, my name is Ewan. I'm a lead informatics specialist from Synapse in Singapore. My background, I'm trained as a pharmacist and I recently completed my master's in data science and AI. So this intersection of knowledge between healthcare and technology enable me to approach challenges from both clinical and technological perspective. So today I'm excited to share how to use generative AI to streamline the mapping process between SNOMED CT and ICD-10-AM, addressing unique challenges within Singapore's healthcare system. Before I begin, I'll give a brief introduction of my company. At Synapse, we are dedicated to transforming Singapore's healthcare landscape through cutting-edge health tech solutions. As the National Release Center, we play a crucial role in integrating international standards such as SNOMED CT and ICD within Singapore's healthcare system. This is the roadmap for today's presentation. First, I'll go through the background and current problem. Then I'll bring everyone through our AI-powered solution and how it operates behind the scene. Then we'll dive into the evaluation framework, discuss error analysis, and end off with future opportunities for this technology. First, the background and current problem. Before I begin, I would like to ask the audience a question. How many of you are involved in or familiar with medical coding and mapping in your institution? Okay, there's quite a few of you. And do you find it to be very time-consuming and tedious? Yes, okay, I thought so too. In Singapore, medical coding is vital for healthcare documentation and billing. Both SNOMED CT and ICD are widely used, with the Australian modification, ICD-10-AM, used and preferred over the US-based ICD-10-CM due to its better alignment with the local healthcare needs. However, there are no direct mappings between these two standards, which makes this process crucial in Singapore. Let's take a closer look at how these two standards work in our healthcare workflow. The mapping between them is typically conducted by clinical terminologists in Synapse or public healthcare institutions. When a patient is admitted in a hospital, their diagnosis is recorded using SNOMED CT. For instance, the diagnosis lower respiratory infections caused by coronavirus is captured using SNOMED CT term. At discharge, ICD-10-CM is used for billing and reimbursement. While SNOMED CT excels at capturing detailed information, ICD-10-AM is preferred for billing due to its broader classification. With my clinical background, I have been helping with mapping for the past 3 years, and based on my experience, I can tell you it's a very tedious process. Other than looking at countless rows in Excel, our team has to cross-check different documents, run SQL scripting, perform clinical assessment while working with a second reviewer to ensure accuracy. Each year, over 5,000 new SNOMED codes are added, and every 100 codes can take up to an hour to map. No wonder my eyesight got worse over time and I had to go for LASIK. Looking forward, the expansion of SNOMED CT and updates to the ICD-10-AM edition can further increase the administrative burden. To streamline this process, our team has explored general large language models from the web. How many of you have tried LLMs like ChatGPT? Yes, okay. And do you experience non-existent or irrelevant answers? Okay. So the main challenge with general LLMs is that they often struggle with the specific domain of medical terminology and the announced relationship between SNOMED CT and ICD-10-AM. For instance, when we tested with Perplexity, it often defaults to ICD-10-CM unless explicitly guided. Next, ChatGPT provided misaligned codes. For instance, the SNOMED CT term chronic kidney disease was incorrectly matched to ulcer of the toe. Furthermore, Google Bard also provided misaligned answers as well. These errors are known as hallucinations, where the general LLMs provide non-existent or irrelevant responses due to insufficient training data. This led us to develop our own AI-powered solution. Let me take you through Retrieval Augmented Generation, RAG, which is a crucial part of our AI solution. RAG integrates our proprietary knowledge base and resolving issues such as hallucinations and outdated information that are experienced with general LLMs. It consists of two components. First, in the retrieval stage, it pulls information from our internal knowledge base. And in the second stage, the generation, it then incorporates this retrieved information and add on to its context to provide updated as well as relevant information. Let's now take a closer look at the data source that we used. This table shows the mappings between SNOMED CT to ICD-10 that is developed by our clinical terminologists up to year 2023 based on our specified mapping rules and version. This file contains over 100,000 records. In addition, we incorporated other data sources such as SNOMED CT concepts, descriptions, preferred term to further enrich our model's understanding. Now let's take a look how this tool operates behind the scene. We begin the process with the ingestion of several files, which I mentioned previously. These files are then pre-processed through a CSV ingestion pipeline. After the data is ingested, it is converted into vectors with many dimensions. So for instance, you can see that the ischemic foot ulcer term has been converted into vectors with many dimensions. The power of these embedding models allow the system to match similar or related terms even if the diagnosis differs slightly from the SNOMED CT description. These vectors are then stored in a vector store. When a user makes a query, such as what is the ICD-10 code for ischemic foot ulcer, this query gets converted into vectors as well and compared with our knowledge base to find the closest file. For instance, the system can retrieve the top matches such as arteriosclerosis of extremities as well as ulcer of lower limb. Next, at the generation stage, we develop a LLM prompt that is tailored to our specific use case. This will be further elaborated in the next slide. This prompt will then trigger our GPT-4 model, which is the LLM model, to develop a conversational response based on our updated information. For instance, the LLM will then reply, the recommended ICD-10 code is I70.2 for the inquired diagnosis. To further elaborate on our prompt engineering, we have designed a prompt to ensure accuracy. First, the LLM is set with a persona with an expert in medical terminology. Then it follows a step-by-step instructions with examples to find the corresponding code based on the disease and underlying cause. This model is then housed behind a chatbot user interface. Clinician can simply search for a code based on whatever diagnosis that they entered in the interface. In addition, our model also contains additional features such as confidence score, where a higher score and value indicate a more confident suggestion. It also provides alternative suggestions for the clinicians to make a more informed decision. Now let's watch a video demonstration on how this chatbot works for the medical terminologists to streamline their workflow.
clinicians can easily access our customized chatbot through a user-friendly web page. For instance, you might ask, what is the ICD code and description for overlapping malignant neoplasm of vulva or enteric campylobacteriosis? The information is immediately retrieved from our integrated knowledge base. You receive the respective SNOMED CT to ICD-10 code and description mappings, along with a confidence score for clinical reference. Additionally, you can explore SNOMED CT-related information, such as synonyms. If you inquire about synonyms for COVID-19, a table is generated showing the SNOMED CT concept ID, preferred term, and descriptions. In this case, one synonym for COVID-19 is diseases caused by the 2019 novel coronavirus. We've also implemented a feedback mechanism to enhance the chatbot. You can click the thumbs up if the reply is accurate or provide feedback when adjustments are needed. For instance, if you think that acute COVID-19 may not need to be provided to users when requested for synonyms of COVID-19, this can be feedback as irrelevant to query.
It is crucial that our model delivers accurate results. Our team has also built a robust evaluation framework to assess the accuracy. Before I dive into the specifics, I will start off with a quote by Murat. A library is not wise just because it houses many books. The same applies to large language models. This highlights that while LLMs hold a vast amount of information, it does not inherently understand this information needed for critical decision making. As such, our team developed an evaluation framework to ensure that our model not only retrieve information, but also generate clinically relevant outputs. This shows the overview of our evaluation framework. In stage 1, we begin with experimentation of 100 test cases. This focuses on refining the retrieval strategies. In stage 2, we evaluated the model against 1,000 stratified test cases. The focus here is to optimize the model's parameters using automatic evaluation matrix. And in stage 3, we, the clinical terminologists, performed human evaluation. This adds a layer of clinical expertise to ensure that the outputs generated are clinically sound. Let's review the matrix as well as the results for stage 2. There are two metrics that are used. First is retrieval accuracy. This measures how often the correct ground truth is found in one of the retrieved outputs. And in generation accuracy, it measures how often the final generated output contains the correct ground truth. This table shows the results for two methods. In row 1, we retrieved 15 top-ranked outputs and required the model to output 3 responses if the confidence score is less than 0.95. In row 2, the model is required to output 3 recommendations regardless of confidence level. This yields a higher retrieval score of 93% and generation accuracy of 83%. The results guide our final model of using LLM GPT-4 re-ranking method as well as the retrieval strategy as specified in row 2. In stage 3, we conducted human evaluations, assessing if the outputs are acceptable due to minor differences in granularity or not acceptable as they are not clinically sound. So this photo, you can see our team hard at work reviewing all our outputs. Out of 500 unique SNOMED CT concepts, a good 80.8% were accurately mapped. Subsequently, we performed error analysis on the inaccurate results to ensure future accuracy. For the first finding, it can be summed up by the quote, A language model is a probabilistic model of a natural language. It highlights that LLMs are inherently probabilistic. This variability can be confusing for users, as rerunning the same query can produce different outputs. For the second finding, we found that those recommendations that are clinically accurate might not always follow the strict SNOMED CT to ICD-10 mapping rules. These rules are often too complex to be incorporated into the system prompt. For instance, the SNOMED CT term, varicose ulcer of the right thigh, is suggested to map to L97, ulcer of the lower limb for ICD-10 While this seems clinically correct, in the mapping rules, it states that L97 is excluded for use and not a valid code. As such, this results in rejection despite a high confidence score of 0.9. For the third finding, we noted the chatbot's sensitivity in handling typographical errors. And upon deeper analysis, we noted that typos that have a high character distortion ratio and those appearing at the front part of the word have a higher impact on the chatbot's comprehension. So for instance, in the first row, you can see that the term nasopharyngistic can still be interpreted as nasopharyngitis. However, if it's changed at the first part of the word to rasopharyngistic, the chatbot had a hard time interpreting the intended term. Finally, we envision several future opportunities for this technology. These are some future development works that we have planned for phase 2. One core area is conversation memory. By retaining chat history, we can allow the chatbot's future conversations to be more contextually aware. Another interesting area will be real-time database integration. We can develop APIs for real-time integration to databases such as SNOMED CT concepts and mappings, allowing the chatbot to be always updated with the most recent information. And finally, we can increase validation by incorporating more complex mapping rules. Looking at the broader application of AI, the market for LLMs are expected to grow exponentially in the next decade, as shown on the diagram on the left. In healthcare, AI has already made its impact in patient education and clinical decision support, accounting for more than 50% of applications. Beyond mapping, we are excited to explore this technology for other developments, such as simplifying medical terminologies. For instance, patients in Singapore can use a chatbot to simplify their medical language to simpler terms, enabling them to understand their own medical reports. To conclude, there are two key takeaways. First, time efficacy. Our solution has improved the mapping process by 50%. Testing has shown that the process has dropped from more than 1 hour for 100 cases to less than 30 minutes. But does that mean that AI can replace clinical terminologists or healthcare professionals? As you can see from the meme that LLMs are everywhere. But in the future, will you see a robot wearing a stethoscope in a hospital? So just a fun fact, these images are generated with generative AI as well. The answer is no. So despite the time savings, the variability in mapping rules as well as unique case scenarios still require a clinical verifications to review the outputs. While AI can improve the efficacy of our solution, it does not replace the critical decision taking and expertise that we bring to the table. So fortunately, we all still have a job. Looking forward, we are planning to further fine-tune our model to improve accuracy as well as expand our technology to other domains in healthcare. By combining AI-driven efficacy with essential clinical verification, we are paving the way for smarter, faster healthcare solutions. Before I end, I would like to extend my gratitude to all our team members for their invaluable contributions to this project. With that, this concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ewan. So we are going to do things a little bit differently. Instead of going into some Q&A right now, we're actually going to go into our second presentation, research presentation. Then we'll be having a break. And then right when the break is done, come on back and we'll have our third presentation. And then we're going to bring all three of our research panelists, research presenters up, and we're going to have a little bit of a panel. And so I would like to call our next presenter, Suk-young. I saw you earlier. Oh, there you are. Suk-young Hu is from the Severance Hospital in Korea, and we are excited to hear your presentation today. So you should be able to push this right here, and then if you have to go back. As we get to 10 minutes, I'll put up 10, and then 5, and then 2. Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Soo-kyung Ha, and I'm currently working as health information manager in Severance Hospital. I thought I was the third presenter, so sorry about that. So for today's, yes, so I will be presenting on revolutionizing SNOMED CT application in healthcare informatics through large language models. So for today's content, I will be discussing the integration of large language models in healthcare and focus on their role with SNOMED CT with some of the research papers that it will be introduced. And also I will be sharing the insight from my work on mapping SNOMED CT with LLMs. So as we all know, SNOMED CT plays a crucial role in healthcare informatics across multiple domains. The SNOMED CT application in healthcare informatics, it can be applied to clinical documentation and data standardization, data interoperability and integration, health analytics, population management, also clinical decision support, and patient care and terminology management and evolution. So as we harness the power of SNOMED CT in healthcare informatics, the rapid evolution of LLMs is opening new possibilities. So large language model is a deep learning algorithm that uses transformer architecture and is trained on a vast amounts of text data to analyze and process language, enabling it to understand and generate human-like text for tasks such as recognizing, translating, and predicting. So there are 4 stages of LLM evolution. The first is statistical language models. It enhanced the task-specific performance, but struggled with data sparsity. And the second stage is natural language models. It introduced the neural networks and word embeddings for task agnostic learning. For the third stage, it's a pre-trained language models. BERT and other used a large-scale pre-training for better context understanding. And finally, the large language model we're in right now, it's examples like ChatGPT offers a general purpose problem solving with emergent abilities like few-shot learning, transforming tasks like interacting with SNOMED CT and application such as ChatGPT. So to explore the evolving role of LLM in healthcare, I will be presenting two papers. The first is titled "The Future Landscape of Large Language Models in Medicine," which it offers the systematic and comprehensive overview of the potential and the limitations of LLMs in clinical practice and medical research and education. So in patient care, the LLMs have the potential to assist with medical knowledge dissemination and facilitate translations and summaries, and streamline the documentation by converting the unstructured text into structured formats. So this can improve greatly communication between the healthcare providers and patients, as well as reduce administrative burdens on clinicians. So in medical research, LLMs can provide access to scientific knowledge by summarizing the complex research, assisting in scientific writing, and supporting programming tasks like code debugging. They enable faster and more efficient data extraction, so it can uncover a new research trajectories by navigating through vast amounts of scientific literature. For the medical education, LLM offer personalized education tool that breaks down complex medical concepts and provide real-time interactive simulations. However, the challenges are posed by LLMs, such as misinformation, biases, and ethical concerns must be addressed before they can be fully integrated into the healthcare. And the second paper is titled "Large Language Models in Healthcare and the Medical Domain Review." This paper explores how LLM are transforming the various areas of healthcare, providing a review from the perspectives of the patients, doctors, and healthcare systems. So the LLMs for doctors, it can be used for the medical literature analysis, also medical diagnostics and clinical decision support. For the patients, they can use LLMs with human education and lifestyle advice, virtual medical assistant, and the health chatbots or patient care. And both of the patients and doctors can use it for the treatment planning or collaborative diagnostics. So LLMs for healthcare can work as drug discovery, automated medical report system synthesis, and radiology and imaging. And lastly, I will introduce some real-life examples, like where LLMs can make a difference in healthcare, showing how they're improving the diagnostics, patient care, and streamlining the workflow. So in medical transcription, LLMs listen to patient-clinician conversation, extract key medical details, and align them with the EHR. So for in real-life use case, Google's MedLM does this, and also with the EHR enhancement, LLMs organize vast EHR data to streamline the operations and improve research quality. For clinical decision support, LLM summarizes complex concepts and provide evidence-based treatment recommendations. So IBM Watson Oncology helps the cancer center recommendation treatment. And also the medical research assistants, LLMs can parse and summarize and research and offer some insights. Jon Snow's chatbot does this, and automated patient communication, LLMs draft responses to patient queries, manage reminders, and provide follow-up cares. For the predictive health outcome, LLMs can analyze patterns and patient data to predict health outcomes and reduce readmission. For the personalized treatment plans, LLMs tailor treatment based on individual medical histories and patient-specific needs. So Babylon's Health AI chatbot offers a personalized health recommendation. For the medical coding and billing, LLMs automate audits and analyze records for billing and coding consistency. The EPIC system integrated LLMs for coding assistance, though the LLMs still struggle with the consistent accuracy. For training and education, LLMs power interactive education tools and simulations to prepare students for clinical scenarios. Ethical and compliance monitoring, LLMs can monitor adherence to healthcare regulations like HIPAA and GDPR. And Fair Warnings uses LLM to detect potential privacy violation by monitoring EHR user activities. So I'm going to introduce a project that is led by Seung-Chan Yu and his team at Severance Hospital, focused on generating medical record draft using LLM language models. And medical records team is one of the team in Severance Hospital. And we are right now, target forms are anesthesiology, surgery consultation, emergency department, discharge records, and later on we are working on admission notes, discharge notes, and progress note. So we are, the input data is the patient's EMR data, the records, and all the doctor's order, and it goes through the YNA LLM, and it drafts the outcome of the medical record. So now integration of LLMs with SNOMED CT, there is research of conducted by Eun-Seok Chang and Sumi Song. It's a use of SNOMED CT in language models. It examines the integration of SNOMED CT into large language models for biomedical natural language processing tasks. And they reviewed 37 studies, and it revealed that the most commonly used LLMs were BERT and its biomedical variants, so BioBERT or clinical BERT. And for the integration approach, it incorporated the most common approach was incorporating SNOMED CT into LLM inputs. So SNOMED CT descriptions are trained for the LLM. And second, integrating SNOMED CT into additional fusion models. And third is using SNOMED CT as external knowledge retriever during the inference. And for the end task, the most commonly used task was natural language understanding. So for the entity extraction, typing, classification, and for the natural language generation task, machine translation, text summarization, question Q&A, and generation were done. So for the performance impact, 89% of the studies reported that performance improved after SNOMED CT integration. Some studies showed no improvement, and even there was a decline in certain performance metric. So for the work that we did, as earlier we talked about how time-consuming and tedious the SNOMED CT mapping might be, and we use a lot of terminologies, and it has to be mapped to SNOMED CT. We are now mapping it one by one, going through searching in the SNOMED CT web browser, and we wanted it to map the SNOMED CT using LLM, so it can be done. So we can have a first draft of the coding mapped. So Severance Hospital has been managing the map of diagnosis and surgery terminology using SNOMED CT since 2005. And over the years, we have been integrating SNOMED CT in operation procedure diagnosis, examination, nursing, and so on. Sorry. So before going into the methodology, I'm going to present 2 papers regarding this task. It's large language models could make natural language again the universal interface of the healthcare. It explains that LLMs have the potential to act as universal translation in healthcare by converting unstructured human readable text into the standardized code. So reducing the need for the manual medical coding and improving the system interoperability. So although LLMs face challenges in accuracy when used in zero-shot manner, but however, applying techniques like few-shot learning and retriever augmented generation can significantly improve their performance. The second study was large language models or poor medical coders. The study was for benchmark the accuracy of LLMs, and they concluded that LLMs are not yet suitable for medical coding tasks without a significant additional development and fine-tuning. So from the previous studies, I found that GPT-4 performed the best. However, it still requires significant additional development and fine-tuning to be fully suitable. So for mapping approach, I developed 4 methods: baseline GPT-4 model, simple prompt requesting SNOMED CT from the disorder and clinical finding. Second is prompt engineered model, enhancing prompts with 10 examples, instructions to improve accuracy. Third is fine-tuned model, GPT-4 fine-tuned 2,000 training examples. And also, the last one is retriever augmented generation model. We implemented a RAG system model that combines retriever and GPT-4. And for the evaluation metric, we use mapping accuracy, semantic similarity, and error analysis. And we have conducted this data set was 1,200 terms were selected for the evaluation. Oh, sorry about that. So for the overall performance, it showed that the RAG model outperformed the other models with a 96.2 valid SNOMED CT match rate compared to the 69.2% for the fine-tuned model and 51.7% for the prompt engineer model and 39.8 for the baseline. So this success was largely due to its retriever augmented methods where relevant terms are retrieved first using cosine similarity from SNOMED CT terminology, and GPT-4 refines the selection. So it also led in extract match rate at 57.6%. And we also conducted the deeper analysis, manually reviewing the code subset analysis of mapping. In terms of error, the RAG model had the lowest rate of incorrect codes, while slightly more semantic errors, 4.7%, compared to the fine-tuned models, 3.1%. Specificity errors were also high, mostly due to the underspecificity, where general terms were selected over precise ones. And structural error was significantly reduced to 14% compared to 59.2% for the fine-tuned models. So in conclusion, we concluded that the RAG model demonstrated superior performance, 96.2% valid SNOMED CT match rate and 57.6% exact match. And in conclusion, RAG models combined with ChatGPT improved the terminology mapping, but human expertise remains critical. So for the how we apply this to the Severance Hospital system, we do annual SNOMED CT updates. So fine-tuned LLMs is used for draft mapping of SNOMED CT codes during the annual updates. And it's especially helpful mapping inactive concept IDs that requires update terminology. And the first draft is then manually reviewed by the experts for the accuracy. And also it can work as quality control. LLMs can also use for the quality checks, ensuring that the manually mapped codes are specific enough, especially when more detailed codes are needed. So in conclusion, the large language models have potential in healthcare for converting unstructured text into standardized medical codes, but it relies on accurate terminology system like SNOMED CT. And at Severance Hospital, RAG model for the SNOMED CT mapping has shown promise results. However, there is some challenges and limitations. It has specificity issues, structure errors, and data scarcity. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the panel later. We're about to go into break now for half an hour, so please go grab some coffee, and we'll see you at 11 o'clock.
Welcome back from the break. Give it another just a second while people get settled here. So continuing on with our symposium, we're going to have our third presenter, Dion. And as I said, we'll afterwards pull up all three of our research presenters and we'll have a panel. But until then, Dion.
Hi. So yes, I guess it says there, I'm Dion McMurtry, CSIRO. I work with a bunch of engineers on sort of fire and terminology related tooling in Australia. But today I'm here to talk about a piece of work that we've done. Whoop, that's moved on automatically, that's not good. On AMT, our Australian Medicines Terminology, and particularly the tooling that we've been building to author AMT. We've sort of reworked tooling that we've had for a decade or so in just a new version. And one piece of that has to do with where we used an LLM. I don't know why that's going forwards, sorry. Is to do with names and the name generation. So each one of our medicines has a fully specified name and a preferred term. There's rules around how to make those names. And to make it efficient for our authors, we've always had name generation features in the software. So we'll go through and we'll talk about that problem. We'll talk about the way we've applied an LLM for that. And how we've gone, briefly go over some of the details of how we implemented that. So the problem, AMT and editorial rules specifically for the descriptions. Oops. So just quickly, AMT. So AMT was first launched in 2008. It's a medicines terminology or a drug extension. In about 2014, I think, was when the AMT v3 version came out, which didn't connect with SNOMED International's drug substance hierarchy for a number of reasons to do with existing content, but did have a description logic foundation, and as does now the new version of AMT v4, which has just been launched after a year or so of consultation. If you look there, the model on the right-hand side there is really just showing that for each product, there's these 7 boxes, which are really the thing at the bottom right is a pack of a branded product. So that's kind of one of the real things. And then the thing sort of second from the top on the right-hand side is the tablet or the real unit that is inside the box. And then right at the top, the brand name. The other things are really just abstractions of those things, more generic abstractions for various use cases. But they all have to have names, and so every time you generate one new product, you generate up to maybe 7 new concepts, or sometimes even more. This is. Sorry about the advancing slides. This is just an example of the modelling of these concepts. So these are 2 concepts. The one on the top left is a bottle of children's paracetamol, and then so it's describing there in this is the diagramming standard, really showing you what the axiom is that defines what that concept is. And then that concept is uses the concept on the bottom right, which is really defining the actual liquid itself that's in there, the branded liquid, and all of the details of it. So this is kind of what the AMT modelling looks like for each one of these concepts. So naming them, as you can see here, is really just all of these properties. You can pull those together and you can come up with a name, and that seems simple enough, but it really isn't simple. There's a massive editorial rules there, and there's a list of them there. I won't go through them, but they're complex. They're difficult for even a human to hold in their head and do all of this in all of the wonderful edge cases. And they're also pretty difficult to implement as sort of procedural conditional code to try to implement those rules into something that works. Particularly all sorts of things happening like when the names of some of the qualifying concepts need to be pluralized or not, or it's complex. So there's hard-coded software that's procedural logic that I was talking about that in our older version of our tooling, which has worked for many years, and without being too hard on it, it was actually quite effective. It performed right maybe about 80% of the time. We gathered statistics on when our users modified the description that was generated or not, and they even when it wasn't. I guess the most important part is even when it isn't completely right, it is actually still very useful because the author isn't starting from scratch. They're starting from something that, even if it isn't quite right, is very close to what is right, and they just have to tweak the text. But it's quite brittle and difficult to maintain. You need a software engineer to update it. You need that engineer to understand this crazy set of rules, and it's probably the biggest challenge has been over time as those editorial rules change or want to respond to things that do need to change. It's very expensive to then go and update this bit of code, and so it creates this tension, and particularly things like renaming has been difficult. So for this latest evolution of the tool, we've gone for building a model instead. So this shows how we effectively have trained this model. So effectively, obviously, there's the 3 overall prompts going into the model for training. We took the existing AMT data, of which there's quite a lot, and use that to generate a training set. And we'd pass in the system instruction into the system prompt into the model to give it general instructions on narrowing the scope of the task and general approach that it should be following. On the right-hand side, you can see there's the user prompt. So this sort of represents what we send in each time when we're actually asking the model to do something. So we're giving it effectively the OWL axiom that represents the definition of the concept we want it to generate the name for. We've modified that to drop in instead of where you would normally see SNOMED IDs in that, the actual names of those concepts, so that we don't particularly want it to learn those IDs because there's going to be new IDs it's never seen before and they're not particularly useful. And then some instructions about the editorial rules themselves, as well as, and they can be contextual as to what sort of thing we're asking it to do, and a little bit about the grammar as well. And then the thing down the bottom left is effectively the ground truth being passed in to say, and this is the right result. And then very, very similar process. So you could see in the previous one, that was for a fully specified name. So the fully specified names are probably a simpler problem because they are big and unambiguous, and they don't necessarily have as strong editorial rules about being pretty or what someone might like to see. They just have to be unambiguous and safe. So this is how we prompted it for the preferred term. Very much the same sort of process, slightly different prompts, and then the training. So in all of this training, we basically identified 24 sort of generalized patterns of these products. And I think it isn't necessarily 24 patterns of products in AMT. It really relates to specifically the naming patterns combined with the types of products and the way that they interact with each other. And we extracted a set of examples. There was a lot of experimentation done based on having sufficient data to train. I mean, we have a lot of data. There was obviously the risk of overtraining as well with the model. So there was work gone into trying to decide what the right amount was. I suppose anecdotally, when we very first started, we trained it with a very, very small amount of data, and the results were surprisingly impressive considering how little it had seen. And then we split all of that, as you can imagine, into a 50-50 split of training data and test data. And yes, all of those terms were injected into the axioms, which obviously we ultimately built into our tooling the way that it speaks to this piece. But for the initial work we were doing, that was all outside of the tool that we were building. So training results, I guess what this is really showing is that there's all of the normal sorts of parameters and things going into the training. I suppose the graph at the bottom there is showing that I think it was 0.028 was the final result of sort of training losses. So it was essentially indicating that it would overwhelmingly generate the exact right result or very near to the right result through the training. But that's just training once it had gone through that. So then we went through a series of testing, obviously, after that to see how good is it performing based on the test data, so things it hasn't seen before. And this was basically a summary of what we saw. So there's different types of these boxes. These are using the names that are kind of more known in the international drug model. We use slightly different names in AMT, but so medicinal product being just a product containing a couple of ingredients and not much more than that, through to clinical drugs, so you drugs strength and form, etc. Brands, branded clinical drug, and then ultimately onto packages, which were that bottom layer in the original diagram at the start with that Advil product. And so you can see there that the results are very, very good. It's right very much of the time. This was a kind of analysis based on various different types of products. So looking at it the other way, and the accuracy across the FSNs and preferred terms. Again, the performance is very good. So there's a median being used there because even just one term, because there's some fairly small numbers of some of these things, it drops off quite quickly. So the performance again was really very, very good. I think there's certain areas where it struggles more, and quite a lot of those had to do with almost like missing bits of information that aren't actually in the modelling of the product, particularly when it comes to the preferred term. So they're things that the author knows that the human likes to see, which is tricky to get right. I suppose the lower scores we certainly did notice across the training set. When you first look at it, when the data isn't exactly the way that you would expect it, or exactly the match of the existing AMT term, sometimes we really discovered that wasn't necessarily that the model was wrong, and maybe that the AMT term itself was outdated. So the editorial rules have actually moved on since that, and the names hadn't been updated over time, probably owing to some of the other problems that we had with trying to keep those names up to date over time. You've got to remember AMT's been going since 2008, so things have changed. So yeah, that was all very, very encouraging. So using the model in production, so Lingo is the tool that we've developed to do our authoring, and essentially Lingo has a service provider interface that it exposes to be able to call out at an appropriate time in the overall authoring workflow to generate names for new things, and that ends up calling out to an adapter. In our case, maybe it's not particularly interesting, but that's basically like a Lambda that is a wrapper for the LLM. The LLM in our case, we're actually using, well, I think it was on the slide before, but GPT-4o Mini, and it actually is being hosted by OpenAI. And we're finding that, and I suppose the other part of what Lingo does, so Lingo will grab hold of, it generates the new modelling that the new concept is that someone needs to create, and there's a whole presentation on that on Friday. But it will then inject into that the names instead of the identifiers, hand that over to the adapter through this API. Model will generate the names and hand the names back to Lingo, which then renders them to the user. Response time is about a second, which is not as bad as it might seem, mostly because when we're generating, when we're kind of calculating which concepts need to exist, what those new concepts are in their modelling, and that is going backwards and forwards to Snowstorm to find out whether these things exist or not. It's doing all of these things in parallel, and so there's multiple requests going off in parallel to the LLM. So the overall process is a delay for the user anyway, and in the scheme of things, they basically don't really notice the name generation time. And it's really early in production for us, really just this month. We obviously have more data from testing our tooling in recent months and all the training and everything. That's not as reliable though as what is the actual month-to-month real production use look like in terms of load and cost. But so far it's looking like about $80 a month, so certainly not particularly expensive. So that's running the fine-tuned model and all of the sort of token-based costs that are associated with running that model. And I suppose that, coming back round to why have we done it this way? I suppose one of the reasons is it was sort of a daunting thought to go and re-implement all of the editorial rules in conditional logic. It would have been very expensive for a software engineer to do that. The testing, time-consuming, and then we'd end up with the same sort of brittle process that we have or have had for a long while. Obviously, when we first built it, this wasn't really an option. But the main advantage is then for the cases when we do have editorial rule changes, our plan is to then effectively run transformations across the descriptions programmatically. We'll write bespoke things when we need to modify names if the authors can't handle just using the normal authoring tools to bulk edit the descriptions in the way that they want, and then essentially just retrain the model. Might be times where we'll need to modify the prompt over time. The prompt lives in the adapter, so we can modify that when we wish. And there are hints that are going from Lingo to the adapter to tell it, it's this type of thing, and that modifies the actual prompt that ends up going to the LLM. So we've tried to sort of keep all of the prompting and those sorts of things out of Lingo. The adapter's the thing that knows about how to turn the type of thing Lingo is asking about into the right sort of prompts for the LLM, and the LLM's the thing that's fine-tuned. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we do have further things to look at in the future. The performance, I think we're sort of happy with. The accuracy, I think we're very happy with, even though there's outliers. And again, the system that we have essentially records whenever a user modifies the name that's been given to them by hand, then that's recorded along with the data that went to the name generator and the name that was suggested to them, so that we can use that to decide how we tweak this process. One thought is, you obviously you can just say, well, we'll just add that into the training set and retrain the model, but there's also quite a danger of effectively skewing the performance, getting worse on common cases where you start giving it a whole lot of these edge cases in the training data. So there's some some nuance to that, and yeah, there's possibility of doing some other work with LLMs on certainly using it possibly for quality processes as well. And one of the other areas we're looking at, it may not be the same as many others, but our regulatory data is not in a particularly useful shape for us to be able to bring through into our authoring. So we're looking at effectively our authors need to fill in a form which represents the data that we need to collect to be able to author a product, and then they hit the button and they get these 7 concepts or how many concepts generated. We're looking to make it easier for them to fill in that form by having that suggested to them from a trained model, trained off the input data from a regulator to, well, if you're going to create that product, we think you're going to fill out the form this way. And that's looking fairly promising as well. And then possibly even outside of medicines. So yeah, thank you. That's pretty much all I've got to say. Oh, actually, before I leave, I really should acknowledge Hua and Matt, who did a whole lot of this work. So it's been a big collaboration. Hua's our real LLM guy, but he's not here. And Matt, obviously, many of you know, has worked on this sort of medicine stuff for me for a long time, and he worked really closely with Hua on how to go about all of this process. So it's been a fun collaboration. Thanks.
Okay, so now, actually, Dion, don't go too far. We're going to have our 3 presenters. Please come up, our 3 research presenters. Here we go. Yuan, Zukian.
Please take a seat.
Oh, yeah. These first 3 seats.
On the dangerously
I'm going to
thin
have to
stage.
direct you guys because it's for camera angles, so here only. And we only have 2 mics, so you guys are going to have to share mics.
Oh. Thank you.
And so we will open up the floor for questions for our panelists. Again, thank you all 3 for presenting today. So Dion's really tall. So one of the questions that I threw at Anthony earlier was regarding SNOMED CT quality of the terminology in assisting the ability to utilize the LLMs and other sorts of AI technology. And that goes back to the old adage, do you want more data or better data? And so I'm going to throw it over to you guys with regards to SNOMED CT. Do you want more content added to SNOMED CT terminology, or do you want better quality terminology?
Both. Is the obvious answer. Obviously, our use case in medicines as well is accuracy is really, really important, but coverage is also really, really important. And there's this constant tension. AMT goes out every month. It needs to, at minimum, cover all of our pharmaceutical benefit scheme, effectively our national subsidy for medicines. And then there's a long tail of other things it needs to cover. So I think that's why and I guess a shameless plug for my talk on Friday about our actual tooling for this, because this is just one piece of sort of a whole lot of automation and authoring assistance tooling to do, I suppose, with both of those aims, because to be able to make it as efficient as possible for our authors to get through it as quickly as possible, but also to give them these tools that are putting the process somewhat on rails, because a lot of it is quite formulaic, also makes it more consistent and safer as well, and helps with quality. We've definitely talked about that concept with this whole idea of are we wanting to use and train an LLM to be able to go from the regulatory data to suggest the population of the form that then goes through the generation process into the content? Or instead of that, do we actually want to use that differently and have our author the way they normally will, which is by reading that content, and instead have effectively use the AI like an intern that also does that work and sees whether they get the same result as the human or not. And have the human blind for that bit, and use that as a sort of a quality process. We haven't really decided which way we're going to go yet, but yes, there's definitely a whole lot of quality applications there as well.
I don't know it's about LLM, but I think we need more content, because when we map certain areas like rare disease, it still needs more content of the area. We do have Red CDM. We are having research on the rare disease common data model, but I believe that it still needs more content on the rare disease. I think it can be both for the rare disease, it needs qualitative data content also. I'm not sure it's about LLM, but
I'll just answer the question based on my experience. So throughout the whole project, I've been helping out with both the algorithm as well as the evaluation. Personally, I felt that SNOMED CT has its advantage because general LLMs, they don't have much medical data. They're trained mainly from like Wikipedia data, but not like medical research paper, etc. So it's limited in the medical knowledge. So SNOMED CT provides a very good information on both description and abbreviations. Description, like for example, synonyms. When we develop our chatbot, we can ask something like, what is myocardial infarction? Then the chatbot will understand that maybe we're referring to MI, heart attack, all the different synonyms. Yeah, another advantage will be abbreviations. For example, when we type into a chatbot, we won't spell out what is COPD, right? We will just ask, okay, what is the code for COPD? Yeah, so with the SNOMED CT backbone, it's able to understand these abbreviations as well. Yeah, with regards to whether, going back to the question on quality as well as coverage, I think both are important because our main aim is to provide the clinician with accurate mapping. So we want to reduce the inaccurate results. We don't want something like we want ulcer of the toe for chronic kidney disease. Yeah, so by increasing the coverage as well as the quality, we can reduce the number of inaccurate responses. I hope that answers the question.
Any questions from the floor? Around? If not, Brandon first. Go for it, Anthony.
I just had a quick question for Dion. You mentioned that in the kind of the hard-coded method that you were using before, you had something like an 80% success rate. And what was the after number after you'd done what you were talking about?
The after number with the LLM. We haven't. I suppose we haven't probably collected enough data on that yet in its actual production use. The training or the testing from the training shows that it's very high, much higher than that, so well into the 90s. We were, and look, 80% was actually pretty good, and of course it varies. So I think the 80% that I was quoting as well before is really taking into account all of the data across all of our products. So our tool would do the same thing as this new one is whenever an author modified the name that was given to it, that was recorded. I think if we dug into that data, we would probably find that it's because there's a very large number of in AMT of products. Most of the products are simple single tablet drugs, where the success rate is very, very high because they're easy. And then a lot of the other ones get much harder, vaccines and things like that. So I think if we dug into that 80% number, you'd probably find it's being very artificially inflated by the sheer volume of simple products. So I think that this is actually performing much better than the original. But we don't really have comparable data yet.
Cool. Is it on? Yeah, brilliant. So first of all, thank you for all the interesting talks and explaining all the different approaches that you're doing to solve different aspects from SNOMED to actual applications inside hospitals or helping doctors in their workflow. So a common theme here with interacting with large language models is prompting. And so is there a perfect prompt? And if not, are there any tips that you recommend in achieving perfection?
I think I'll go ahead first. Personally, I tested quite a few prompts. From the beginning, we just crafted a very generic prompt. I think online there are some resources on what are the good ways to craft a prompt, like including a persona, meaning that you can set the LLM as being an expert in terminology. Then I think some other points that we find it useful will be giving it instructions, like follow a step-by-step method. First, you need to read the whole context, understand it, then output based on what you understand. And another way we thought is useful is providing examples. So if we require the LLM to format in a specific way, like you want to format them in Excel format, or you want them to output in table format, you have to specify in the examples. But I can say that the prompt is really quite trial and error. Like we did almost more than 20 to 50 prompts trying to find what is the accuracy and rerunning the model. I think AI, data science is like this. We have to run the model a lot of time to find what is the really accurate. And we have to have human evaluation to see whether it's really the responses are actually clinically sound. Yeah.
For prompting, so like what she said, in context learning was the best. So giving examples provided a very high accuracy. So without in context learning, just doing the prompt for the just asking a specific question didn't really generated good quality output. So yes, in context learning.
Yeah, I think, yes, I don't know that there's any silver bullets or anything. There is a lot of trial and error. So, I mean, most of the work has gone into, as you said, there's some general patterns to follow, like describing, and you would have seen in the system prompt we had there, describing the step-by-step approach and sort of laying out how you want it to approach the task is really important. We also, obviously keep into the user prompt the specifics of helping it understand the particular task you're asking it to do, as opposed to the general sort of mode you're putting it into. I think the other interesting thing for us was this tension between fine-tuning versus providing in context examples, like single few shot versus a whole lot of fine-tuning. And there was quite a bit of experimentation with that, and also how much training was too much training or not enough training. And so those were the things that were being played with to get the result. And part of that also comes into practical considerations like effectively like costs, right? So you can have a really big context now, which is great. So you could not do very much fine tuning and then throw in a whole lot of examples but that will drive up the cost of running the thing as well. So we were playing with a number of factors there, and even just choosing the model that you're working with as well. So for us, we started with 3.5, and then ultimately went on to 4.0 mini. And that model, works really well.
So actually, this is a follow-up on Anthony's question on prompt engineering. And I have two questions, one for Dr. Zhuang and one for Dion. So Dr. Zhuang, in your study, you've included examples in your prompts. I wonder if the positive examples are dynamically generated for each query, or are they static? I mean, are they the same examples across the whole batch of queries that you use? And the question for Dion is, you have included an example of your prompts in one of your slides, which has 4 rules for editorial policies. And you said also that you have over 80 rules, of editorial, requirements. So are the 4 that those are the only ones that you can actually specifically write in a sentence, or are there any reasons for missing out some of the rules?
So for the first question, whether they are dynamic or static, for us, our prompt, we use static examples. Yeah, we haven't explored the dynamic version yet. So what we do is that we just provide an example, like if the user asks what is the ICD-10-AM code for hypertension, you must output in this format. Then we draw out a table. Then the table must have the specific sequence, SNOMED description, SNOMED ID, ICD-10-AM code, ICD-10-AM description, and confidence score, so that with every response the user asks, this table will always be the same output and format. Yeah, this is to facilitate our use case so that clinicians in Singapore can have a very good visualization of what is the alternative confidence score of each row of the specific mapping that they require.
So for us, the system prompt is static, but the user prompt's obviously dynamic with the specific task, and that does include all of the elements that you saw on there. That was just sort of one example. Obviously, the axiom that's being passed in is different, but the prompt itself does change depending upon the nature of the thing that we're asking it to do, because we've got additional context of what type of concept it is that we're asking it to generate the name for as well. The rules, all of the rules, it's an interesting question, and we've been round and round that, even doing things like trying to give it all of the editorial rules. The editorial rules is an 80-page document, and it's written in narrative. Then it's not written as rules effectively, which is not necessarily a problem. It can, the LLM can still use that. I think we've instead gone down the path of effectively kind of inferring the rules from the fine-tuning of the data that it's seen. And so if we do change the rules, then we'll change the data and retrain it. And then, that process is relatively easy and in fact not even really all that expensive to do.
A more sort of general question for all three of you. There was, from Michael Lawley, an earlier question about clinical reasoning and clinical thinking. And my question to you is there any experience in any three of you in your links to undergraduate medical or nursing programs of using what you've made with undergraduates to understand how computers think as opposed to how humans think about reaching conclusions about medical knowledge?
I guess maybe simply no. I haven't really.
I think this is really hard stuff, actually.
It is.
And most medical undergraduates would say, why would I spend any time thinking about this? So it doesn't surprise me that you say no, but perhaps I can just rephrase the question. Do you think it would be a good thing to do?
Yeah, that does sound like a reasonable sort of thing to do. I think that the landscape is quickly changing for everybody in every profession and every field of learning. So yeah, definitely. It's interesting, the word thinking. When we do the particular tasks that we do, I don't think of it as the machine thinking. It's just doing maths basically. But it is an interesting way of kind of approaching it, and we're everyone's getting more used to effectively asking questions like you're talking to a sentient entity. But it's an interesting idea.
I'm not sure if it answers your question, but I want to share about this experience I did when I was doing my master's. So what we do, just a couple months back, we have this common sense reasoning to test on the LLM. So some kind of common sense reasoning is like, if I buy an apple at the Apple store, are you referring to the fruit or the phone? Another example is, this is goat. Are you referring to the animal, or does it mean that it's very good? Yeah, so this kind of lingos and common sense is something that the LLM have not achieved yet, because when we tested with the generative AI, the accuracy is not that great. But we try to do different methods, like fine-tuning the model to these lingos, to these kind of examples. It can achieve still not bad, maybe 80% accuracy. I think moving forward, the model and generative AI will take a leap. There will still be advancements in this, and there will be kind of opportunities for them to have common sense reasoning, thinking logically as well. Yeah, we'll see how the technology holds ahead.
And what about a Korean medical school? are the professors in the universities beginning to connect with you and say, how do I teach this to a medical student or a nursing student?
Not yet, but yeah, but that was a very interesting talk, and I haven't had the experience of common sense reasoning, but I will definitely think about applying to my studies.
Yeah, well, not so much a follow-up as actually to fill in on Dion's response. So not in that piece of work, but in other parts of the team where we do work on information retrieval and ranking algorithms and so forth. We have done work with medical students to extract or attempt to extract data sets of how they're thinking when they're asking questions of search engines, which is kind of the more traditional generic form of this, to gather that kind of information to help in re-ranking and better information retrieval approaches. So some of that stuff is going on in other areas, but
Yeah. I mean, that's very familiar to my experience, where I do organize some special study modules with some data scientists. And frankly, we don't get many volunteers, but those that do are extremely productive in the kind of area you've just described, actually. So I think there are some really nice opportunities for bringing a broader group of individuals learning about medicine or nursing, or indeed the allied health professions, to think about data differently.
Yeah. So just on that information retrieval thing, I did have a question, if I can. For the mapping stuff, which I really enjoyed, especially the evaluation, the evaluations were against other models, other LLM approaches. But what about the more traditional, BM25 or other relatively cheaper ranking models? Did you do comparisons of mapping performance?
For this project, we didn't compare conventional NLP and ML models, machine learning models. But in another project we did a RAG for laboratory terms. So we compared traditional models such as SVM, support vector machines, naive Bayes, as well as logistic regression. We also look at more advanced NLP models like transformers, such as BERT, Robota, and finally the large language models. And the accuracy for generative AI with RAG tends to be better. Yeah, so the accuracy we are looking at can range from 90%, 80 plus to 90%, whereas the second one will be transformers like BERT. That one will be 70 to 80%. But conventional, even though they are fast, like you mentioned, with less computing power, their accuracy tend to be lower and even less than 50%. So as such, we chose the LLMs RAG for our final output, and it helps with the chatbot as well.
I did a study on mapping with BioBERT and other biomedical variants of BERT. It's much more lower, and so I had to do continuous pre-training and then do fine-tuning. Still not good enough, so I did keyword matching, and then it got better. But comparing to the LLM, the traditional way of machine learning model didn't really perform well. I guess before I did the study on a Korean and English term combined terminology mapping, so that might be the problem. But yes, but LLM still works much better in my experience. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Eirik Avrønjum. I'm from Norway. First, thank you very much for 3 great presentations. I think it's quite assuring that the use cases we have defined in Norway are pretty much the same as you have told us about today, and also the approach of how to solve the use cases. I would like to raise a perspective, which is maybe a little bit off topic, but I think it's very important, and that's by the sustainability when using artificial intelligence. Do you think about that perspective? Or do you have any strategies to reduce the carbon footprint and that kind of stuff? Or is it all about quality, fastness? It's fine to say no.
Yeah, and probably it's all intermingled, I suppose, a little with cost. I mean, cost is a good indicator of, in this domain anyway, of what sort of footprint you're having, because you're consuming more resources, you're going to have to pay more money. It's that simple. So certainly for us, we went through the process, and I mean, Hua obviously did a fantastic job for us in trying to choose even an appropriate model. So we're not using the biggest and best model because we don't really need to, and we can use something a lot smaller. He's even done some work on looking at using sort of quantized models for then very low like CPU based execution and those sorts of things. We haven't sort of quite got there yet, but the overall costs we're seeing are very low, really, for what we're doing. So yeah, maybe not directly, but certainly there's a driver in there anyway.
The question, you're referring to stability as cost of the model? Sustainability. Oh, sustainability? Oh, okay. Not sure. Sorry.
I'm going to take the opportunity of owning the mic. So I'm going to ask the last question. So my last question before we move on to the next part for all three of you is, I think we're all here very excited about what we're doing in this particular domain. What pushback do you get? In a different context, do you get people coming back saying, well, actually, we don't want to use LLMs, and how do you tackle that?
Well, I'll go first. Yeah, I think for us, it's obviously still relatively young technology. People are always scared of new things. I think there's a few dimensions to that for our specific project and our use. One is, I suppose, just the effectively project risk. Is this going to be a great folly and we're going to end up having to go and rebuild all of this stuff a different way anyway? But I think you can address that relatively well. It was quite quick to do a proof of concept that showed pretty quickly that it was a approach that would work. I think the other thing is probably our users are effectively the content authors for our content. They're pharmacists, and they're concerned about the quality of what they were going to get compared to something that they've been using for a long time, and they were well and truly used to that. And I think for them, and even for the other engineers, there's a sense of I guess, a lack of control. So that if it isn't doing quite what you want, are we actually going to be able to get it to do that? I mean, obviously, if you've gotten this programmatic code that you can just go and find the defect in and change and fix, you can, and you can explain exactly why it's doing what it's doing. You can't. But I think that's sort of been addressed with the, I guess, the overall accuracy of the thing. There's a kind of a slightly different challenge there. I mean, it's doing a lot of really cool things in there. It's, doing like molar conversions and all sorts of unit conversions and things that were difficult to get right programmatically, and we probably didn't even have them all before. I suppose the different challenge is that because it is so much more accurate, the old one was very reliable in certain cases, and other cases it didn't get it right. It was close enough and easy enough to change. It's so much more accurate that when it's not quite exactly what they're thinking, it's maybe even slightly harder to spot because it is so close. So that's perhaps another slight challenge. Although there certainly are times where but ironically with the large swathe of new cannabis products that we get all the time, it does hallucinate quite a bit on some of those at the moment, but they've got a very particular sort of pattern. So yeah.
So when I first did a project on BioBird, I reported the accuracy and output data to the hospital, and they said, well, if the mapping is very important for hospitals because it is very used in various research. So they said if humans have to manually see the mapped first draft map, why not just do it first? And so that was the main talk. But right now with the LLM output, it's more precise than the even humans mapped. So it is more specific. And I was very surprised that, we had this qualitative problem in our mapping system. So now we can argue that it can help with the qualitative perspective. Also, it saves a lot of time because we have the reference of LLM's output. Yeah.
Okay, so I will share from my personal experience as well. With regards to the question if there's any pushback, so I think the main pushback is within the team. So within the team, we have 3 to 5 people doing mapping for the past more than 5 years. And one of them, after they know that we want to try to use AI to do it, she's quite resistant and, hey, what if you take over my job? I have nothing to do. Yeah. So I think our focus now is to really allocate the manpower instead of doing tedious mapping. We want to allocate this manpower to more consultancy use for AI in the future. If AI can help to improve the efficacy, perhaps we can provide consultancy to refine the model and do in other projects like clinical decision support. So we also are considering a model and chatbot. For example, in the hospital, there's many protocols like for cardio, for different procedures. Can we use a chatbot to help them find a document and tell the doctors what are the next step to do? So these are some of the expertise we can provide other than mapping. So directing the manpower to other users in the AI field as technology advances. Yeah, so that's my story.
I think just one last comment on that. I mean, the other part that we haven't done yet that I did mention was the research into being able to go from the regulatory data through to authoring the thing, and that does come directly at that same idea of, are you using AI to take my job, sort of thing. And of course, the answer to that is really no. We need humans involved in this process still, definitely. It's like I kind of tried to explain it to our authors, like saying, that if you're working in a warehouse, all I'm doing is trying to give you a forklift. I just want to make your job faster and easier, so you can do more. Because AMT, as an example, or medicine's terminologies, there's almost an endless supply of work. So we're just trying to make it easier for them to do it, and also safer, so that it's more accurate and yeah.
Thank you. Can we have a round of applause for our research presenters? Okay, so next we have a special video from Tim Morris, VP of the go-to-market from Elsevier. And that's a short video, and then that will be followed by Rory Davidson giving kind of a State of the Union of what's going on with SNOMED International and tech. So.
Hi, my name is Tim Morris. I am the Commercial Vice President for Elsevier for the international markets. I'm a nurse by background and responsible for our clinical solutions as we deliver them across the globe. I was asked specifically to talk a little bit about the application of generative AI tools within clinical practice. And I wanted to take this opportunity to demonstrate the Clinical Key AI product, which is now being sold across the globe. Elsevier has been developing artificial intelligence systems for many years, using natural language processing to support an understanding of the content we have in building taxonomies, also in risk stratification, and helping to identify patient populations who may be at risk of disease. When generative AI came out, we were particularly interested in solving one of the major problems is that a lot of clinicians are now drowning in too much information. And how can we support finding the right answers for them, particularly in the area of a higher cognitive load requirement for managing patients with comorbidities and polypharmacy. I think generative AI may actually be very useful in finding information within large bodies of knowledge. A particular area we were interested in was the research challenge. So looking at the fragmentation of the sources, we see that clinicians will be using online resources that often go to Google because it's often the quickest way to find information, maybe going to Medline. They'll be using journals, they'll be using our own product, Clinical Key, and competitor products as well. We know that it takes around 32 minutes now to find an answer to a specific clinical question, which is a challenge for most clinicians. So what we wanted to do was to try and reduce the fragmentation of those resources, put them together in a trusted data source so that when clinicians ask questions, they can find that information and surface it. We were particularly worried, though, about the use of generative AI in its raw form in just a standard large language model because of the potential risk that this has in terms of hallucination. And so Elsevier has developed, with its partners, retrieval augmented generation, or RAG architecture. And in this process, what we're actually doing is we're taking a trusted knowledge database. So we've selected specific texts, specific journals, to identify as a content source. Now we convert that into a numeric format, so an embedding technology. And we can do the same to a clinical question as well. And we can do a vector analysis to find the closest semantic pieces of text within our corpus of knowledge that we put into the system. So that's the retrieval part of this process. We then take the original question and the content that we've brought back and augment a clinical prompt, which will then go through the medical large language model and actually pull out specific answers from within the trusted source. We then use another large language model to actually generate an answer which is readable and useful for a clinician in practice, but also draws together the references that have come from the trusted sources we provide. This process actually ensures that we not only have an answer which is coming from a known source, but we can present that to them and provide them a link to go and read the original piece of information as well. We're actually using a human-in-the-loop process as part of this. So in the initial design, we actually got 120 clinicians to review the 2,000 clinical questions that were developed by them and actually see what the answers were like. Were they valuable answers? Were they correct? Did it understand the question and response within the artificial intelligence? We were looking for potential risk of bias. We were looking at potential risk of hallucination and trying to make sure that didn't occur. We also have an ongoing product surveillance process where we ensure that our clinicians are also looking at responses from our customers where they indicate perhaps there could be a better response. And as a result of that, we may add in additional content we might find additional sources or change the way that the answers are provided, thus reducing the amounts of hallucination and bias and toxicity within artificial systems, particularly. So let me just take you now into the product and give you an opportunity to see that product in action. So first of all, Clinical Key AI is built on Clinical Key. And Clinical Key is our database repository of valuable journals, books, clinical overviews, and calculators, which are used by clinicians across the globe. Many of our clinicians will actually go directly to a particular journal that they like. It may be the Lancet. They want to go and read the latest information from the Lancet and pull up a particular piece of information and read that in its full. And this is a normal way of finding information. But when asking complex questions, they may want to look at comorbidities and additional information. Clinical Key AI, we've combined those specific sources that we've selected with our clinicians. So our clinical overviews, the drug monographs, the drug class overviews, and the full text journal articles from a clinic series, which cover a very broad specialty knowledge to help get those subspecialty answers that clinicians might be looking for. We've also included the abstracts from around 2,300 journals, which are not just Elsevier, so 65% of those will be non-Elsevier as well. And we've also included some textbooks. We're currently working with the American Cardiology Society to bring in their guidelines within this, and we're talking to other societies and guideline development teams to bring their content in as well. And what I'm able to do within this now is ask a clinical question. I'm just going to ask a simple one. What is the dose and efficacy of tamoxifen in preventative care? Now this question will go off to our drug source information. It will find the information specifically about preventative care and breast cancer and pull back that content. You'll see it's given me a brief paragraph that describes a 20 milligram dose for 5 years or a 5 milligram dose for 3 years, which has shown efficacy in reducing breast cancer risk with fewer side effects. This is not only helpful in terms of a short summary, but it actually provides the references and allows me to go and see those references in detail. I can actually see the information that's being brought back by the retrieval process. This is the information that gets passed to our large language model. It's very much smaller than traditional LLMs, which are using all of the information that they have and therefore risk hallucination. This reduces that risk of hallucination and only takes the answer from in there. You'll see that we've got external sources, and I can go to these external sources as well, whether that's the Daily Med information specifically about this drug. And all of this information is, of course, put back in through the large language model to make it easy to read and easy to use for our clinicians. It also includes the ability to do follow-up questions. This is a conversational tool and allows the user to go in and ask follow-up questions in that way. We can see the helpful, not helpful flag in this. We ask our clinicians to feedback. This doesn't get used to train the model. This is used for our clinician panel to determine how we could improve the product if we looked at those clinical questions. And on the left-hand side, you can see my previous questions within this. I can go in and actually review my previous questions and even do follow-up to those questions as well if I want to. So that's a very brief overview of how Clinical Key AI is the clinical application of a large language model in practice, where we've tried to reduce some of the potential risks of standard large language models, which is the hallucination or the bias, or not knowing where this information has come from. I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I've got the pleasure of wrapping up with a little bit of information about what we do at SNOMED International in this domain. this is the second symposium in this kind of topic that we've done. Last one was Atlanta. A lot's happened since then in SNOMED, in large language models and AI, and lots of other things at the moment. So it's a fascinating time to be involved in this stuff. And I had some slides in there of the hype cycle, but Anthony stole my thunder, so I quickly took them out. But it was interesting to look at the hype cycle of this time last year and now. Not a lot has changed. Lots still on the upwards curve. There's a few things at the top, but the ones going down to the trough of disillusionment or whatever it's called, generative AI is on the way down, and there's some intelligent applications that are kind of going down as well. There's only one thing on the plateau of productivity, and that's computerized vision. That's the only thing that's actually got into mainstream, really. So everything else is not really moving very quickly. And so that's a really interesting thing in technology. And those of you who've been involved in technology over the years know that many technologies move quite quickly through that, and others take a long time. So it really shows we're really early days in this journey through AI technologies and everything it means and everything it will do for us. So what does that mean from a SNOMED? Since last time we met, there's the title. So where do we see AI working in this? So obviously, SNOMED International, our focus is SNOMED CT, a high quality, reliable, trusted product that can play part of some of these solutions. But also we see how can we leverage it within the organization? Can we leverage it to improve our authoring processes, make better quality? And how do we help this out to implementers, our members, and the wider community? Whilst SNOMED CT is an open ecosystem, and everything we do, we try and give back so we can learn from and people can improve and give back the information as well. So we really kind of focusing this on these really three areas that I think it's important to always acknowledge. We also have put together a strategy, and I talked about this last year, just kind of a reminder, as always, PowerPoint's gone wrong. So generally there are 5 areas that we're looking at when it comes to AI. One is about how can we use this in implementation. And this is things about how do we do translation better? How do we generate content that we need to generate? How do we promote the use of SNOMED CT in AI models? And I think there's been a lot of discussions about that today. It seems that I think really in the last 12 months, I think we're very much moving to a RAG type model for some of this information, because as we know, SNOMED International Edition anyway is a monthly release. So rebuilding that model every month is a pretty costly and probably unnecessary activity. How can we use it to enhance the end user experience? One challenge we always had in SNOMED International is, I think we all know what we'd like to see, how SNOMED be used, but we're ultimately down to restricted by what software developers do and what the end systems are doing in this particular area. So can we do some proof of concepts to show how to do this better? How do we use it to improve the modeling, improve the quality assurance? This is definitely an area that we want to use it for. How do we use it to make our authoring more efficient? The reason why we asked the representative from Elsevier to give us a little talk was it's a very interesting project. Clinical key is used in many areas, and we use it in our authoring process to get information. When you can start to get references in a much more timely fashion, you're working in this part of the hierarchy, it gives you all the rest information quickly. It's a very, very useful tool. So we're investigating how we can use that. And also, how do we, the one thing that we all have to tackle is how do we get this wealth of unstructured data in patient records into a structured format? And that's the one I'm going to talk about first. So, entity linking. This time last year, we kicked off the entity linking challenge. And just a bit of a recap, because whilst we have a meeting in April, many of you wouldn't have been there. So this is the follow-up symposium. We ran this from December through to end of February. And it ended up being more successful than we kind of expected. We had 553 people joined, teams rather joined, 53 submitted in the end, and there were 374 submissions in total. It was a really fascinating kind of project to do because we were engaging with a community who knew nothing about us. Most people in this world don't know what SNOMED is. They put a W in, the infamous SNOMED. And so actually we were getting questions about, how do we use SNOMED? How do we use it in this type of environment? I think at one point, if you kept a kind of a spooky eye on the leaderboard, and at one point the leader was some team who had been building things for a lander on Mars, and they'd done petroleum research and topics. So we're really getting people coming in from elsewhere, and that's interesting, really interesting, because all this stuff goes back into the open source community. We had 3 winners. Interestingly, They weren't large language models, so the winner was not a large language model. It was natural language processing. But they were based out of Israel. The second team was some PhD students in Germany, and the third team was from the medical informatics lab in University of Lombardy, I think. One of the things that really came out of the challenge that we really learnt, and I said this last time, is that we ate our own dog food when it comes to annotation. So we talk about annotating, but obviously we're not annotating any content because we're not sitting in hospitals, we're not dealing with patient data. It's all very true to talk about the theory, but actually to do it. So part of this challenge was to take the MIMIC data set that comes out of PhysioNet at MIT, was to annotate it. And so we actually went through the full annotation process, producing annotation guidelines, worked with 6 different annotators, mainly from the Asia Pacific region, to try and get some kind of commonality around the culture from a more biased point of view. But we learned a lot. So we learned where there are some challenges in the hierarchies to annotate. One of those was the situations hierarchy. We had our annotators, because you try to get where annotators have a very similar answer. And basically they were spending an hour talking about one annotation in this particular hierarchy. So we just decided that it was not becoming efficient, so we took it out for the purpose of this particular challenge. However, at the end of this process, it's about 2 to 3 months, I would say, we've ended up with 70,000 annotations. And this is the only data set that's available in an open-ish type format with that much information in SNOMED CT. There's lots of stuff out there. Was some stuff out there with ICD, but nothing with SNOMED. So that itself has also been kind of a really useful thing that came out of this. And as I said, they really were a very different type of approaches than the winners. The winner was more traditional, and then one was decoder-only LLM, and one was an encoder-only LLM. So we basically, all those results are published. You can see them. They're all available from our website, I think. But since then, what have we done with this? So we've been going through the winning entries, been working with those 3 teams. And the intent is to publish a paper, hopefully within the next couple of months, that's kind of gone through what were the strengths and weaknesses of the different approaches, what did we learn, what were the annotations that were easy or difficult to work with. And it's been a really interesting process kind of going through that, and everybody's been very willing participants in that. We've also looked at, can we improve the annotation process? And yes, we think we can. So we worked with a tool that Anthony knows well, MedCat, that basically to do the initial annotations, but we believe we can improve that using some of the models out there and using LLMs to improve the annotation to go back into data. So we're basically going to be releasing some software into our open source repositories that people can look at and use and see if that's kind of useful out in the real world. And the other thing is, we're going to get these annotations back into the community, but we've been trying to find a way to get it back into the anti-linking community, not just into our world. And so we've been speaking with the Open Medical LLM team at Hugging Face to see, can we get this encoded data, annotated data into their models, which means we're kind of getting SNOMED out there, getting it used, getting people, again, back to people approaching it who were not approaching it before. So it keeps giving. We haven't decided, the management board this week, we're talking about what do we do next? Do we do another entity linking challenge? Do we decide the annotations are so useful, we're going to do more. And so we'll just manually annotate some more content so that it could go back into the MIMIC data set. So it's available for people to use for R&D. So we're still working through where we go with that. Of course, this is an entity linking challenge using English. That's always a challenge with all this stuff. It'd be great to do something in other languages. But if this project showed us one thing, is there's just not enough data out there to do this stuff on. So unless you've got access to that data directly, then this is why we fall back on MIMIC, and a lot of the community falls back on MIMIC, because that's the only data source available right now. So if you've got data, please let everybody know. I think you'd have people biting your hand off. So the other thing that we've been doing, and this is really more to how can we help the adoption of SNOMED CT. One of our biggest challenges in SNOMED is it's great we have SNOMED CT in English, but translation is a challenge for all of our member countries. So how can we do this quicker? It's an extremely manual process. Historically, people have used more traditional translation tools like DeepL or Google Translate or Amazon Translate or so on. And so we thought we'd do some proof of concepts. Can we use LLMs to do this? Can we use these new technologies to improve the translations? And doing so, we said, well, let's go out and do it. We didn't want to use the GPTs or the Claudes or whatever other names they come up with. So we looked for one that was actually very multilingual. So there's a model called Aya that comes from Cohere.ai, and it's very focused on multilingual languages. It has 100 languages with great coverage. So we took this model. You see, it's got a lot of details. Definitely go and look at it. We find it quite useful. So what we did was we said we're going to take 15,000 concepts across pretty much all over the hierarchy from 4 countries who are in different situations when it comes to translations. So Sweden, the Netherlands, Korea, and Estonia. Sweden and the Netherlands have a pretty extensive translation. Sweden has a full translation, and the Netherlands has a translation that meets all the needs. It's still pretty big. It's more than 2/3 of the terminology. Korea and Estonia are at the beginning of their translation journey. And so this is what we thought is interesting to take the two and see, does this work across everybody? And also different languages. Because we specifically chose languages that were similar-ish, but not the same. Because there's no point doing it in Spanish. We have a Spanish translation. There's no point doing it in some of the larger languages because that's easy. I think we could all agree that some of the translations are out there at the moment from a point of view of automated translations are great for the big 6 globally, and then they kind of drop off a cliff when you start looking at other languages. And we saw this with simple tests we did before, where we said, let's just do a straightforward Google or DeepL translation. It's really good for Spanish, it's really good for French, it was pretty poor for Swedish, and it kind of dropped off the cliff when we came to Estonian and Korean. So how we get those kind of percentages higher is where we kind of came at this. We took 2 metrics. One was an exact match. What exact matches do we get? And the second was a Levenstein ratio, which is a Lever measure which looks at the character similarity between different strings. The results were not necessarily surprising, but interesting to kind of see it in reality. And this meant that when we just took Aya out of the box and we ran this through all the different languages, DeepL is by far better. So without any tweaking, any fine tuning, the traditional translation models are much better in this context to do translations of the terminology. So then to exploit Aya, as it says here, we basically took, can we lean on the hierarchy? Let's lean on SNOMED and the richness in SNOMED. So we looked at what are the attributes, what are the parents, what are the siblings in the hierarchy, and feeding that in to see what that kind of it, and especially where they've been translated. So if you've got some parents that have been translated, does that feed into the translation, giving it more information, really fine-tuning the model as we go through it? And it was surprising. It was significantly more accurate than DeepL off that, significantly. However, it then hit the problem of you need to have stuff translated. So back to the classic thing of a model, it's all well and true starting with something that's there already, but you've got nothing to build a model on. So we've kind of come out with this answer that this is actually a very useful activity for those who are maintaining translations. There's some work to do here. I think there's further work to do. That we have some further feedback. So I've got this. When we went to the next step, actually, we went back to the NRCs. Said, okay, here are 100 translations. We didn't tell them which was which. And we said, here's one is A, one is B. Tell us if it's A or B or neither. And the 4 NRCs, some of whom are here in the room, helped us out and were willing to have a look at this. And it was really interesting to see where it came back, because you can see there that the LLM approach came out easily on top when it came to the existing translations, whereas the DeepL came out easily on top for newer translations. So that type of translation technology is more appropriate for new translations. But the interesting thing was that you could get it better. And this is like a rabbit hole, like going down these kind of proof of concepts and research area. You can keep on going for years, and how do we fine tune it? So one of the feedback we had from the Dutch team was about it didn't meet the editorial guidelines really. Now, if you fed that in, then you could meet the editorial guidelines. So you can keep on fine tuning this to make this better. So there's really some interesting things to do in that. But throughout all of this, so I put it in bold. I mean, everybody mentioned it in my sneaky last question on the panel, which is there's no substitute for human evaluation. The translators are not going away, but can we make the process quicker so that maybe not having to evaluate everything, because there's a lot to translate in SNOMED. Where do we go next? Basically, in the translation, I think we're going to essentially go back and see can we work with the NRCs who have a translation. Everything we've done is open source. It's now sitting in our GitHub repositories. Feel free to go and play with it. Can we work with NRCs to make that better? And then we're going to do another proof of concept that's kicked off last week with newer translations. Can we use, and looking at things like, can we use other ways of approaching this, translating and then back translating? Can we go to looking for languages that are in the same family, Romance, Germanic, Scandinavian? Can we do this to help improve the translation and feed more in? So how far can we go down tweaking this model to be useful? It's a really important thing, and I think we all know, most in the room know this, that we need to have SNOMED translated into the local languages. We absolutely need to. And so whilst any country joining this point will need to translate, so we're going to keep on investigating this to see how we can leverage all these new technologies available to us. Suffice to say, that's enough of me. So basically, this is really, we're keeping an eye on this area. We'll be doing some of the other things for the next year. So whether we have another named symposium next year, I don't know. But please do keep an eye out on in our GitHub open source repositories. Everything's available to everybody who wants it. We post blogs whenever we've done something useful, and we reach out to people who are interesting. That sounds wrong. But also, I want to say one thing to the kind of the research community. If you're doing stuff in this area, we are absolutely willing to work with you. Come and we will bite your hand off, which is probably some SNOMED code somewhere. But we want to work with you. We want partnerships. We cannot do this ourselves. We are not AI experts. We're not the subject matter experts, only about SNOMED. So we were more than happy to work. If your projects you're working on at the moment, you think are interesting to the community, please do come and knock on our door. We would love to have a conversation. So thank you very much. Just in time for lunch.
I was going to say, I think we have time for one question before we break for lunch. If anyone has any question or if everyone's hungry.
I'm not making it obvious, am I?
No? Okay, well, at that, we're going to close the Research Symposium for 2024. Thank you guys so much. We really enjoy doing these research symposiums. We like to really showcase your research. And as Rory said, we want to work with you. We want to partner with you. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you guys next year at our Research Symposium next year. So thank you very much. 감사합니다.